Hola y muy buenos días a todos. Hello and very good morning to you all. Today we're going to look at a very special topic. It's gonna be los verbos reflexivos, reflexive verbs in Spanish. So this is a topic that I realize that quite a few of you have had some problems with because of the grammatical section as well as the vocabulary. So those are some of the things we're going to look at today. Okay. And from the start, off the bat, you look and you see some kind of interesting pictures. You see, first of all, a man brushing his teeth, another person dressing him or herself, and a woman showering or bathing herself. I wonder if you can see what is common in all three pictures. Well, let's see if you guessed it. All of these persons are doing an action to themselves. The man is brushing his teeth. The woman is dressing herself. And the other woman is showing herself. So let's get right into the topic, los verbos reflexivos. So what are reflexive verbs really? Well, reflexive verbs are actions that show, or verbs, that show an action being done to oneself. So usually when we do an action, we're directing that action towards a different person or thing. For example, we could say, I am going to eat. So I eat chicken. All right. In Spanish, that would be yo como pollo. Or we could even use another example. We could say, I sing a song. Yo canto una canción. But what about when we are the objects of our own actions? When we are the ones who benefit or who are affected by our own actions? For example, if I am bathing myself, I'm the one who is being affected by the action. I'm not bathing anyone else, I'm bathing myself. What about if I'm combing my hair? I'm the one who's going to be affected by that action, right? Not anyone else. What about if I'm putting on my clothes? Well, the clothes are going onto my body, so I'm the one who's affected, no one else. So that's basically what reflexive verbs are. When we use reflexive verbs, however, we're not showing that, so just reiterating, we're not showing that we're doing any action to anybody else but ourselves. We're doing that action to ourselves. Okay? So, the biggest issue that comes up when we talk about reflexive verbs is conjugation and, of course, reflexive pronouns, which we will see coming up. But I won't go too deep into this. We discussed this in the last video. I even sang for you, right? So you now need to memorize these endings. And if you haven't watched the last video on verb conjugation with AR, ER, and IR verbs, then you can go and do that right now and then come back and watch this video. In the meantime, let's go on to look at some examples of reflexive verbs. So we have bañarse. So I'm going to start from left and I'm going to go up and down until I end up on the right. So let's start with the blue box to the left, bañarse. Bañar on its own means to bathe, but bañarse means to bathe oneself. And as we talk about that, I want you to look at all of these verbs. What do they have in common? I think I just pointed it out. All of them end with se. Usually they can function on their own without having se at the end, but putting se at the end changes the meaning so that you know it's a reflexive verb. You know that that verb intends for you to do an action to yourself or for someone to do an action to himself. Okay? So, bañar would mean to bathe, but bañarse means to bathe oneself. Similarly, duchar would mean to shower, and it probably wouldn't make sense on its own, but ducharse means to shower oneself or to take a shower. We also have vestirse. If you look at the top in the middle, you'll see vestirse. Vestirse means to dress oneself. Lavarse, right below that one in green. Lavarse means to wash oneself. And honestly, we don't usually talk about washing ourselves. We usually say bañarse, to bathe ourselves, or ducharse, to shower ourselves. But lavarse is used when there's another object of the action, but that belongs to us. So for example, to wash ourselves, not necessarily ourselves as in our bodies, but what about washing our faces? What about washing our hands? What about washing our feet? It could be anything, any body part about us. That's when we use lavarse. Okay? Then we also have cepillarse in purple at the bottom. Cepillarse. Cepillarse means to brush oneself. Now, of course, like lavarse, this is usually accompanied by another object, but an object that is a part of our body or an object that belongs to us. So it's still an action on ourselves, but maybe just a smaller part of ourselves. So what do we usually brush on our bodies? You said it. You can brush your hair as well as you can brush your teeth. And usually we use cepillarse to refer to brushing teeth. We'll see exactly how to say that right after we look at the rest of these verbs. Then there's despertarse. Despertarse means to wake up. So to wake oneself up. We don't usually say to wake oneself up, but we know when we say to wake up, it means we ourselves are waking our own selves up. Nobody is waking us up, right? But it's a reflexive action in Spanish. What about levantarse? Well, levantar on its own means to lift or to raise. But levantarse means to lift oneself up or to raise oneself up. In this sense, we have to say it exactly how we'd say it in English, which is just simply to get up. Like when you get up in the mornings, levantarse. And the last verb we'll look at is acostarse, and that's the exact opposite of levantarse, to lie down or even to go to bed. Okay? There you have it, some examples of reflexive verbs. Now, we need to know how to use these reflective verbs and how to make it so that we can talk about these reflexive verbs or ascribe them to different people. So let's go back for a second. Notice, remember we said all the verbs end with se. But, excuse me, when we conjugate these verbs, what will we have to do? We're going to have to drop the se and put another particle, the reflexive pronoun, in front of the main verb. You're going to see exactly what I'm talking about right now. So, these are reflexive pronouns. So reflexive pronouns are what we use when we want to show that reflexive action, but with a conjugated verb. So we need to know how to change the se at the end of the reflexive verb infinitive, for example, in ducharse, based on the person doing the action. So for example, you'd have something like ducharse turn to me ducho. Exactly how that happens, we're going to see right now. So these are the reflexive pronouns for the different persons. We know our subject pronouns, as discussed in the last video, are yo, tú, él, ella, usted. nosotros o nosotras, y ellos, ellas, and of course, ustedes. We don't see it in this one, but we know that it's supposed to be there. So almost when we say me in a reflexive verb situation, it's almost as if we're saying myself. When we say te before the verb, the reflexive verb, it's almost as if we're saying yourself. Se, depending on if you're using él, ella, usted, it would be like saying yourself, himself, herself. Nos, ourselves. Se, yourselves for ustedes. And se, themselves for ellos and ellas. I know it sounds a little bit confusing now, but you're going to see exactly what I mean right now. So, let's look at this example. Remember we spoke about the verb lavarse and how we can use it as a reflexive verb? Usually we have to add an object that has to do with us, that's a part of the body, maybe. So lavarse la cara, to wash one's face. Okay? So let's apply it using the same relative pronouns we just learned. The me, the te, the se, nos, and se. Yo me lavo la cara. That means I wash my face. Tú te lavas la cara. You wash your face. Usted se lava la cara. You wash your face. But of course, this you is a formal you. The tú was informal. Él o ella se lava la cara. He or she washes his or her face. Nosotros nos lavamos las caras. We wash our faces. Ustedes se lavan las caras. You, plural, so like uno in patois, you wash your faces. Ellos, ellas se lavan las caras. They wash their faces. But what if we had left it blank and just said, yo me lavo? Or better yet, suppose we had said something like, yo me levanto. Remember, levantarse means to get up. That would simply mean, I get up. Or what if we used a verb that was more direct as a reflexive verb, such as bañarse. Yo me baño. I bathe myself. Tú te bañas. You bathe yourself. Usted se baña. You formal bathe yourself. And so on and so on. So that's how the me and the te and the se translate to myself, yourself, themselves, etc., etc. Okay? Let's look at these particular verbs. These verbs are very important as well. We looked at them just before. But what's different about them is that they're stem changing. So when we conjugate them, they change, the stem changes. So instead of me desperto, we say me despierto. And of course that continues for the tú te despiertas, él, ella, usted se despierta, but it doesn't change for nosotros. That's how it always is. These stem changing verbs don't change for nosotros. So it's nos despertamos, not nos despiertamos. Okay? And it's the same for vestirse. Vestirse is a stem changing verb as well, because instead of me vesto, we say me visto. The stem changes. Okay? However, when we use nosotros and we say nosotros nos vestimos, it stays the same. We don't say nos vestimos. Okay? You're gonna have to play that back so that you can understand. Here are some examples of reflexive pronouns being used. You can look at this in your free time, pause the video, and try to understand how these are used. And maybe even make up some sentences on your own, given the verbs that were provided at the start of the lesson. Here are some expressions that have to do with la rutina diaria, so our daily routine. But all these expressions require using reflexive verbs. Muchas gracias por escuchar.